to immunology. And diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is an immune disease. And not only immune disease, it is an autoimmune disease. Okay? فما يكون عندنا diseases and we call them immune diseases, يعني في مشكلة في immune system, we have under these a group of immune diseases, we call them autoimmune diseases. And type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. What do I mean by autoimmune? I know my immune system is to protect me, okay? So why should the immune system work on my self-antigens, okay? There should be a problem. That's why we call these diseases autoimmune. Even if before I start discussing with you the mechanisms of immune pathology, pathology يعني disease, immune يعني immune system, صح? Before knowing how is this, you should understand that this is something not usual. This is a disease. And what will work here? Our immune cells اللي احنا حافظينها بتاعت البروتكشن. Which cells you know? How an immune response happens? You know, when you have a bacteria or virus, there is an immune response. And you know that there is humoral immunity, cell-mediated immunity, the immune system. Same, but now working on self. Okay? And here, the self is the pancreas. Okay? So what I want you, before you study, to understand, when I say type 1 diabetes, autoimmune, then this is somebody that has a genetic predisposition. He can live all his life without having the disease. But if I compare two individuals, one has a genetic predisposition for an autoimmune disease, the other doesn't have. Okay? So this one, number one, has a genetic predisposition. Yani he has something different from somebody else for the disease. Waiting for an environmental factor. And we will study now what do we mean by environmental factor to make the disease appear. Okay? Just simply a viral infection. Viral infection. Okay? This viral infection was the environmental factor that made the disease appear in the person that has a genetic predisposition. Okay? Then we move after that to what are the cells that are going to attack in our problem now, the pancreas. It is mainly the T cytotoxic cell. هي اللي هتدمر, صح? But also we have autoantibodies that are there. So now you have the humoral and the cellular. Autoantibodies يعني الantibodies. Okay, B cells هتعمل antibodies. At the same time we have حاجة بتدمر cytotoxic T cells. Okay, so humoral and cell mediated. Okay. What we are going to discuss now also is the genetic predisposition is mainly in the HLA system. HLA اللي هي MHC. This is something present in our body in chromosome number 6, and it is expressed for class 1 on all nucleated cells and for class 2 on antigen presenting cells. MHC سمعتوها قبل كده, major histocompatibility complex. HLA. Okay? These, you are not studying them in details now in this problem, but we want to know that somebody, it's like a blood group, huh? يعني انت مولودة, half the reading is from your mother, half the reading is from your father. Okay? It doesn't change all the life. ففي أنواع معينة, types of the HLA, if the person has it, it makes him at high risk of getting. It's a genetic risk of getting type 1 diabetes. Okay. And also, before I start, I will give you an example from the actual life. Two brothers. Mother and father are not diabetic. One 4 years old and the other 8 years old. Both of them got type 1 diabetes at the same time. Both of them had a viral infection, Coxsackie virus, at the same time. Okay? When we did the HLA typing, they came to be even identical. They had HLA DR3, DR4, DQ8, DQ2, same high risk HLAs. They got part of it from the mother, part of it from the father. When together they are there, the children are at higher risk of getting type 1 diabetes. Okay? So this example shows you the importance of the genetic HLA association, the environmental factor, which is here Coxsackie virus, and how this is an example of getting the disease. Okay? Now let's see what we have in the slides. I think if you just grasp what I told you, it will be easy for you now to understand. Type 1 diabetes, classification, autoimmune or immune-mediated. We have an organs in type 1, immune-mediated, organ-specific. When we say organ-specific and organ non-specific, يبقى تحت حلقة autoimmune diseases, we have some that are organ-specific, فقط organ, thyroid مثلا, autoimmune thyroiditis, okay? Type 1 diabetes, only pancreas, يبقى organ-specific. لأن في أنواع تانية, they don't have an organ. And as we said, it is destruction of the pancreatic beta cells. T cells are important, cytotoxic T cell, and we have a lot of cytokines that will work and so on. And here there is a sentence telling you regulatory and effective cells. The types of T cells, we have a type called regulatory T cell. Okay? This regulatory T cells should work on preventing the immune system to attack the self. نقول عليها T regulatory, T reg, okay? Regulatory T cells. This regulatory regulates, ساعات اسمها القديم suppressor T cell. يعني ما تلاقي reaction جاية للسلف توقفها, okay? They found in these people, they have sometimes a problem of this regulatory T cells that they are not working efficiently. And we have the effector T cells, اللي هي T helper, TH1 و TH2, T cytotoxic, دي effector T cells. So here we have the risk factors. Somebody has a genetic, HLA, certain genetic, an environmental, like a viral infection, and then here we have the immune response to that, and the destruction, and then we have at the end the destruction and the disease. This doesn't happen, quickly like that. Usually, what happens is that it takes like stages of normal, then the destruction happens, so there is starting of the intolerance to glucose, and then we have the disease at the end. And you can see here, now I spoke about the HLA, and I will have another slide to tell you more. And the environmental, I told you mainly the viruses, but there are other things also. And here we have the antibodies. We will study what are these autoantibodies that are here in type 1 diabetes. Then we will learn what is called insulitis and the T cell mediated destruction. So here is a slide telling you about the MHC, the HLA. HLA or MHC هي نفس المعنى, the same thing. So we have class 1 and class 2. I don't want you to go deep in the MHC in this problem, but I want you to know what are the HLAs that are associated with type 1 diabetes. So here we are telling you that this HLA has class 1 and class 2, and there are certain association with certain diseases like ankylosing spondylitis with the B27, and our problem, the autoimmune with type 1. So these are the 4 HLAs that are known to be associated with type 1. مو معناته ان انا اعمل الشخص يطلع عنده ال HLA واحدة من دول اقول خلاص ده type 1 diabetes. No, he can live all his life without, but he has high risk. So HLA DR3, DR4, DQ2, DQ8. كل واحدة من دول يعني As I told you, example that I gave you of these two brothers, so they had all the four. Now we move to the antibodies, O2 antibodies that are there. هو ازاي الانتيبودي بيتكون؟ ملازم الأول في antigen presenting cell that presents an antigen to that helper T cells. Helper T cells helps the B cells. At the same time, T cytotoxic also will work, and the helper T cells helps the B cells to form antibodies, and this is the humoral immunity to the antigen. Here the antigen is the pancreas, parts of the pancreas, okay? So you can see here in this slide, example insulin. Insulin here is the example of an antigen where antigen presenting cell will present it to the helper T cell. And of course we have to have certain HLA here and T cell receptor عشان يحصل الرياكشن. TH1 will work, activated, and then it will also work here, and the B cell will form the antibodies, and here is the islet cell where the reaction is targeted. So what are these autoantigens in the pancreatic cell? We have something called GAD. يبقى أول حاجة أحفظها كلمة GAD وبعد كده أعرف هي قصدي بها إيه. بس GAD stands for glutamate decarboxylase. GAD, anti-GAD antibodies, insulin, islet cell, zinc transporter. Okay? These are all antigenic where there is autoantigen, so there is autoantibodies to all these. The first and the most common is the anti-GAD. But is it present in all cases? No, not all cases. But it is present in majority of cases. Studies found that there is negative association or correlation with insulin autoantibody. So, but positive with islet cell. So this means that somebody that has anti-GAD has also antibody to islet cells. Okay? So this means not all these autoantigens, these autoantibodies are present. مو كلهم موجودين. Okay? لكن بيختلف من كيس لكيس. What is also important that we have something called LADA. إيه LADA دي بقى؟ Latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. It's also autoimmune. So this LADA is somebody that has passed all the pediatric period without having type 1 diabetes. جينا في early adulthood في العشرينات كده هوت. Okay? ظهر الأعراض. Now the doctor doesn't know, is it type 1 or type 2? So he starts to look for autoantibodies لل type 1 diabetes. Okay. نفس الاميون باثولوجي اللي احنا دلوقتي عاملين to discuss it في البيدياتريك the type 1 is also present in this LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. So it's not type 2, it's autoimmune. Okay? Another type of antibody, autoantibody present. This is islet cell antibody. Islet cell antibody, okay? And here this shows you, I was just telling you, not all cases have the list of autoantibodies. You can see here the sensitivity and specificity. يعني جاد أكتر حاجة common, sensitive يعني في معظم and specific. Then comes the other ones, the insulin and the islet cells. خلاص يبقى احنا خلصنا كده الأوتو antibodies وعرفناهم خلاص. Now what triggers autoimmunity? I just gave you an example of something triggering autoimmunity اللي هي ايه؟ الفيروس. Okay. So virus is environmental factor and we have the genetic factor. الجيناتيك فاكتور احنا قلنا ال HLA بس not only the HLA, there is also sometimes other genetic genes that play a role also as a genetic factor. طبعا this slide you should not memorize or anything, but just telling you the risk, high risk توأم زي بعض يبقى higher risk واحد جاله التاني ما جالوش لكن he is at a higher risk. فالستاديز هنا بتوريك ان هما identical مثلا siblings twins then the risk is 8 times 8 like that. يعني just showing you different types of autoimmune diseases and how important is if يعني the risk factor if they are having the same genetic or they are identical and so on. Here is the common autoimmune disease with the major HLA association. احنا قلنا type 1 diabetes DR3 DR4 وده كمان DQ. This shows you that there are other autoimmune diseases that are also associated. ايه غير الفيروس بقى؟ في الهرمونز. يعني females دايما عندهم more than the males regarding the autoimmune diseases. Why? Because hormones play a role as triggering environmental factor. Here comes the infection. يعني لاحظوا ان Western countries where there is a very good hygiene, more autoimmune diseases compared to less hygiene where less autoimmune is there. What is the relation between a pathogen like a Coxsackie virus, which you mentioned now, and this, what is happening that it is triggering, causing the destruction? نظرية اسمها molecular mimicry. Mimicry يعني زي بعض. Molecular on the molecular level. Okay? بحيث الاميون ريسبونس اللي الجسم قاعد يعمله اما الفيروس دخل هو نفسه الاميون ريسبونس ده الانتيبوديز because there is similarity between the virus and the pancreas, so here it will tackle also the organ. يمكن دي تبين لكم أكتر. Here you can see how here on the left side in A, this is the normal situation, normal inhibitors of autoreactivity and just an immune response عادي. But here in B, we have here the foreign antigen, which is could be the virus, and we have here the B cells where they are going to form the antibodies, and these antibodies are going to attack also the tissue, which is in our case the pancreas. So we call this molecular mimicry. ايه السبب؟ There is a similarity on the molecular level between the tissue and the virus اللي كان موجود هنا. This applies also for some bacteria. من نظرية اسمها molecular mimicry. Mimicry of what? Of the pathogen اللي هو بكتيريا أو فيروس, okay? And the tissue اللي هو قد يكون في example now the pancreas. خلاص؟ This is called molecular mimicry. And we have examples here in this slide. مش لازم نحفظها بس يعني توريك إن you can apply this in different types. Molecular mimicry احنا قلنا دلوقتي كوكساكي فيروس مع type 1 diabetes. عندنا other autoimmune diseases where we have other pathogens that apply also for that. Drugs is another environmental factor. So we said hormones could be, viruses could be, drugs. Drugs also can trigger an autoimmune disease. Ultraviolent radiation and here psychological stress. يعني اكتشفوا ان stress by itself is a triggering factor that can make a disease appear. And dietary factor. Many of the additives that are present in food can be an environmental factor. There should be always breakdown of the tolerance to have an autoimmune disease. يعني ايه breakdown of tolerance? Tolerance لأن البody tolerates not to work on the self. There should be something that breaking this tolerance in order to have an autoimmune disease. I don't want you in this problem to know about how are these mechanisms of tolerance in our body. We have central tolerance, peripheral tolerance, حاجات mechanisms عشان تمنع الautoimmune disease. هندرسها في SLE problem إن شاء الله. As I told you, type 1 diabetes, organ specific ولا non organ specific? Organ specific. هنا السلايد دي ظريفة لأنها is giving you example of autoimmune diseases organ specific. Okay? Insulin of course type 1 pancreas, لكن we have other diseases قلت لكم الثايرويد مثلا autoimmune disease. لكن here there are others autoimmune diseases زي ال SLE اللي هتدرسوها في الآخر non-organ specific. Okay? So autoimmune diseases can be organ specific or non-organ specific. كل دول autoimmune diseases. نرجع لبتاعنا بقى type 1 diabetes. I want you now to look at this. At birth حد اتولد عنده genetic factor. Okay. less than 5 years ممكن الانسولين يبقى عامل مشكلة شوية as antigenic لكن لسه ما فيش disease. يبقى بعد كده هو another autoantibody. It's like a tree that is growing. And if you read this, you will understand what I'm saying. It is just here, stages of type 1. So at stage number 1, 2 or more islet autoantibodies. ما فيش مرض, ما فيش disease, but there are the autoantibodies. Then we have glucose intolerance. Then we have clinically symptomatic, and then we have severe. Again, same thing, showing you the stages that happen to somebody born with a genetic factor, waiting for an environmental factor to grow and form the disease. So you can see here how these gradually work from normal glucose till clinical disease at the end. So there are multiple players for this destruction, okay? And we saw the B cells, the T cells. We saw insulinitis. We want to know what is this insulitis. Insulin يعني وitis يعني فيها inflammation? Yes. This is an actual picture showing you the insulin in red and the T lymphocytes in green, causing what we call insulitis of the pancreas. So CD4 لها دور, CD8 لها دور, TH1 لها دور, cytotoxic T lymphocytes لها دور. All these play a role. And we call type 1 diabetes heterogeneous. Why? In presentation. Because it doesn't have an actual age of onset. It doesn't have an actual autoantibodies that should be there. We have examples, but not all of them are there at every case. So we call it heterogeneous in presentation. We're about to finish. Just to tell you that now there are some societies that are trying to help prevent this disease or at least delay the time. I'm always asked when somebody has children that are diagnosed, parents are worried. What about the other children? Will they get it or not? Sometimes they do the HLA typing for the other children to be sure. Are they having this genetic factor? Are they at risk? They are worried, no? This is something normal. So what does this society do? They are finding these antibodies to be found prior to clinical disease. يعني الأوتو antibodies دول قبل ما يجي الديزيز. For they are trying to look for it risk factor of type in order type 1 to build on detection of these antibodies. فبيحاولوا ان هم يعملوا campaigns and so on to try to find somebody that has these autoantibodies at risk of getting the disease. هو ما هيمنع الديزيز بس هيبقى يتنبه ليه؟ من لايف ستايل من كل شيء على اساس على قد ما يقدر ممكن يعيش العمر كله بالاوتو antibodies with no disease. Okay? So this screening for type 1 is to delay or prevent even the disease. And here is the details of a nice article about this screening for type 1 in general population to try to delay or prevent the disease, published in Diabetes. I think this is the last slide, yes. Type. Any questions, anything not clear? Hopefully you grasp what I want to say. Don't go deep to what I didn't say. خلاص? Even there are some slides that I'm just passing, huh? Just for you to understand. It's not only type 1 diabetes. There are other diseases also that have the same idea. Okay? And I am stressing on some things. خلاص? But try to take note on that so you don't be lost in it.
Doctor, the patient has at least one type of antibody to develop the disease, right? لازم at least one.
شفت أختي آخر حاجة إيه؟ بيقولك screening 2.
At least two.
to be at risk لو انت بتعملي screening program. Any questions؟ واضح؟